Eliana Carter folded the last of her shirts into a small suitcase the way she always had, carefully, as if each crease could preserve a memory. Her daughter, Isabella, had said the cruel thing without even looking back. "Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." The words clung to Eliana like chill damp. For 43 years she had been the obedient wife, the quiet backbone of a home that Gabriel, her late husband, had designed and loved. She packed because she always did what was expected of her. 3 days later, instead of accepting a handout or a pitying phone call, she sat across from an old family lawyer in downtown Rosewood and felt something inside her shift. Sometimes the pawn becomes the queen, she thought, and it surprised her that the thought tasted of something like relief. The lawyer, Harrison Whitaker, had been polite with a sort of tired kindness reserved for people who had seen too many families fall apart. He tapped a stack of papers and said, "Mrs. Carter, we should review Gabriel's will." Eliana's heart beat hard in her throat. She had assumed Isabella would inherit and that some small apartment or facility would be her fate. But Gabriel had been a careful man. He had planned for more than the obvious. As Harrison spoke, Eliana listened the way a detective listens at a crime scene. For clues, for motive, for the truth. 2 months earlier, before the funeral wreaths stopped being delivered and before morning coffee tasted like chalk, Eliana had been Gabriel's wife of 43 years. She had held him when his breathing changed, wiped his brow, and whispered the songs he loved. After he died at 71, Isabella had arrived like a storm in designer clothes. "Mom, you can't possibly handle Rosewood alone," Isabella had said, soft and judgmental at once. "The stairs, the upkeep, this is too much." She had brought brochures for retirement communities and pamphlets for condos in town, smiling the smile families use when they plan to rearrange someone else's life. At dinner one night, Isabella and her husband Adrian cornered Eliana with a stack of glossy real estate leaflets. "These places have activities, people your own age," Adrian said, as if Eliana's years were a commodity to be sold. Eliana had laughed the shallow laugh of someone trying to hide grief, but beneath it a small alarm had started to clink. She knew Gabriel's habits. He had shown her drafts, explained investments, insisted she understand certain accounts. Something about Isabella's eagerness felt rehearsed, not tender. The day everything changed, Isabella appeared with 2 suitcases and a small, practiced frown. "Mom, we've made a decision," she announced, as if choosing curtains for a room. "Adrian got his promotion. We need Rosewood to be in town. You'll be safer in a retirement complex." Eliana stared at her daughter. "But this is my home." Isabella's face hardened for a moment. "Actually, according to Dad's will, I inherited everything. I've let you stay out of kindness." The words landed like a fist. Eliana felt as if 43 years of dishes, birthday cakes, and late-night worries could be swept away by that single sentence. "You were just the wife." Gabriel had always loved Isabella in a particular way. He doted on her, yes. But Eliana remembered moments when Gabriel's eyes had warmed at things she did that no one else noticed. The injustice burned. "There must be a mistake," she told Isabella, voice small. "You were supposed to be there for the reading," Isabella replied, as if that excused everything. That night, Eliana packed 2 suitcases and a small box of photographs. Isabella watched from the doorway like a woman making a shopping list. Adrian loaded the bags into their sedan with mechanical efficiency. "You'll love the independence," Adrian said without looking Eliana in the eye. They drove off and Rosewood grew smaller in the rearview until it was only a lump of roof and heartache. At the Sunset Rest, a motel on the edge of town charging $59 a night, Eliana sat on a narrow bed and tried to listen to herself breathe. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee. Isabella had left her $200 and a quiet, efficient dismissal. "This should cover you for a few days while we sort Dad's paperwork." The money felt like a tip rather than a rescue. Eliana had been married to Gabriel through promotions, small tragedies, and the kind of ordinary domestic details that form the backbone of a life. She had never been a passive observer in their household. She had held things together. But grief had made her pliable. She had accepted Isabella's help at face value. In the motel's cracked mirror she looked like a stranger. Hair pinned, face hollow, hands that had stitched, cooked, and kept a house now clumsy with the unfamiliar task of being alone. Yet the next morning she used the motel's Wi-Fi to search for Gabriel's attorney. Harrison Whitaker's office was downtown. The bus fare felt like an investment in something that might be more than revenge. The secretary greeted her with the polite recognition reserved for people who had worn the community's history on their sleeves. "Mrs. Carter. Gabriel talked about you a lot." Harrison's voice, when he entered, carried the confidence of a man who had read many hearts. Harrison leaned forward, sliding the will across the polished mahogany desk. "Mrs. Carter, this is the real document," he said firmly. Eliana's eyes scanned Gabriel's signature, steady and unmistakable, then the neat typewritten words beneath it. "I bequeath to my beloved wife Eliana Carter our home at Rosewood Estate, including all its furnishings. I also leave her 70% of all financial assets and investments, approximately $26 million. Eliana's breath caught, her pulse racing. Harrison went on, his voice steady. "To my daughter Isabella Hayes, I leave $12 million, but it shall remain in trust. She will only gain access if she treats her mother with dignity and respect after my death." Eliana pressed a trembling hand against her mouth. Gabriel had anticipated this very betrayal. "You mean?" Isabella lied. "She said I got nothing." Harrison's expression darkened. "Your daughter not only lied, Mrs. Carter, she forged papers. What she's done is criminal. Gabriel protected you more than she realized." Eliana felt tears prick her eyes, but for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of despair. They were of vindication. "Mr. Whitaker, what does this mean for me now?" Eliana whispered. Harrison's lips curled into something like a grim smile. "It means you are the rightful heir, not Isabella. The house, the majority of the assets, all of it belongs to you. And because she failed the dignity clause, her entire trust reverts back to you. You are inheriting $38 million in total." Eliana gasped softly, shaking her head in disbelief. 38. The lawyer nodded. "Yes. But before you celebrate we must act quickly. She has already committed fraud, and the law needs to intervene before she drains accounts or causes more damage." Eliana thought of Isabella standing in Rosewood's hallway, coolly telling her to leave. She thought of Adrian carrying her bags like garbage. The humiliation burned anew, but this time it came with steel. "What do I need to do?" she asked firmly. Harrison picked up the phone. "First, we involve the authorities. Then, Mrs. Carter, we make sure Isabella learns that arrogance always has a price." Detective Rosa Delgado arrived an hour later, her badge catching the light as she greeted Eliana warmly. "I've seen this before, but rarely so blatant," she said after hearing the story. She examined the forged papers Isabella had given her mother and shook her head. "These aren't amateur copies. Someone with financial connections helped her." Eliana sat quietly, her heart hammering as the detective spoke with Harrison about freezing accounts. "Do you think Adrian was involved?" Eliana asked softly. Detective Delgado gave her a pointed look. "Almost certainly. An investment banker doesn't stumble into forgeries by accident." Harrison began making calls. Banks, utility companies, even Rosewood's property records office. Within 2 hours, every account Isabella believed she owned was frozen. Her credit cards were declined, her name erased from the utilities. Eliana almost smiled imagining Isabella's face when the facade began crumbling. At exactly 3:47 p.m., her phone rang. Isabella's name glared across the screen. "Mom, what's going on? The bank is saying all Daddy's assets are frozen." Eliana's voice was calm, even icy. "I'm sitting in Harrison's office, darling. He just read me the real will." Silence. Then Isabella stammered. "You don't understand, I was protecting you from complicated money matters." Eliana cut her off. "No, Isabella. You were stealing. And now you're caught." By evening, Operation Justice was underway. Detective Delgado coordinated with the district attorney, while Harrison documented every forged signature. Eliana sat in the leather chair, watching it all like a woman seeing a chessboard for the first time and realizing she was already 3 moves ahead. Around dinner time, as Isabella and Adrian sat at Leclerc's bistro celebrating what they thought was their new fortune, uniformed officers walked in. "Mrs. Hayes, you are under arrest for elder fraud and forgery." Gasps rippled through the restaurant as Isabella's shrill protests filled the air. She demanded to call her lawyer, Adrian's golfing buddy, but he was no match for the charges being leveled. The next morning, Adrian himself was arrested at his office after evidence tied the forged documents to his firm's printing contractors. For Eliana, the arrests felt surreal. That night, she returned to Rosewood for the first time since her eviction. Standing in the master bedroom, she saw Isabella's clothes still scattered across the dresser. She quietly stuffed them into black bags and set them on the porch. "She can collect them when she makes bail," Eliana muttered. For the first time in weeks, she lay in the bed Gabriel had once shared with her, no longer as a discarded widow but as the rightful mistress of Rosewood Estate. The following day, word spread like wildfire. Local news stations caught wind of the case, dubbing it the Rosewood inheritance scandal. A reporter even called Eliana directly, asking for an interview about elder abuse. She hesitated, unsure if she wanted her humiliation broadcast, but she also knew her story could help others. Meanwhile, Harrison updated her on bail hearings. Isabella's bail is set at $55,000. Adrian's is $200,000, he said. But with their accounts frozen, they'll struggle to post it. Eliana sipped her tea slowly, her fingers no longer trembling. Later that afternoon, Adrian's mother, Eleanor Hayes, arrived at Rosewood in pearls and polished arrogance. "Mrs. Carter, let's be rational," she began smoothly. "Kevin, pardon Adrian, made mistakes, but dragging this into court helps no one. We're prepared to offer you $5 million to drop the charges." Eliana stared at her, stunned. $5 million? You expect me to sell my dignity that cheaply? Eleanor pursed her lips. Think about your grandchildren. About family. Justice is one thing, but vindictiveness is another. Eliana's voice was steady when she replied, "Justice isn't vindictive, Mrs. Hayes. It's overdue." After Eleanor swept out with veiled threats about Gabriel's business dealings, Eliana sat in the study long into the night. The room, once Gabriel's sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield of secrets. She pulled file after file from the cabinets, reading contracts and statements. Some looked perfectly ordinary, but others were filled with strange payments to shell corporations and consulting fees that didn't make sense. A dull ache formed in her chest. What had Gabriel been hiding? When Carol Chen, the investigator, arrived, she spread the papers across the desk. "Mrs. Carter," she said gently, "I think Gabriel may have been laundering money. These payments match patterns we see in organized financial crime." Eliana's stomach clenched. "No. Gabriel was many things but dishonest." "No." Carol placed a hand on hers. "I understand, but the evidence is here." Eliana gazed at the stacks of paper and thought about Isabella's arrogance, Adrian's greed, and now, possibly, Gabriel's secrets. "If my husband played a game behind my back," she murmured, "then it's time I learned the rules." Carol stayed late into the night, her sharp eyes scanning each page. "These are not small inconsistencies," she explained. "We're talking millions moved in patterns typical of laundering schemes." Eliana sat back, feeling the weight of 43 years of trust shift uneasily inside her. "If this is true, everything Gabriel left me is tainted." Carol leaned forward. "Not necessarily. It depends on how the funds were categorized, what records exist, and what the authorities can prove. But Mrs. Carter, you need to prepare for the possibility that Adrian and Isabella already know about this." Eliana's lips tightened. "You think that's why Eleanor came here, waving her checkbook and threats?" Carol nodded. "Exactly. They're not afraid of your anger. They're afraid of what you'll discover before they can control the story. Eliana looked around the study, her eyes falling on Gabriel's photograph in its silver frame. You kept secrets from me, Gabriel, she whispered, but you also gave me the strength to face them. The next morning, Eliana's phone rang. Isabella's name flashed across the screen. She hesitated, then answered. Mom, we need to meet, Isabella said urgently. There are things you need to know about Dad. Things that change everything. Eliana's voice was calm. I already know, Isabella. Know what? Isabella asked carefully. That Gabriel was laundering money. That the fortune you tried to steal may not be clean. That you and Adrian planned to use this against me. Silence crackled down the line. Mom, listen carefully. Adrian's lawyers have been talking to federal agents. They're willing to negotiate. If you cooperate, you can keep Rosewood and $5 million. The rest will go to the government. We'll all walk away free. Eliana almost laughed at the audacity. You forged documents, threw me out of my home, and now you want me to partner with you in exploiting your father's crimes? Isabella's voice rose. It's the only practical choice. Otherwise, you lose everything. Eliana hung up without a word. That evening, Eliana met Carol again. They're planning to offer evidence to the FBI in exchange for immunity, Eliana explained. Carol's expression hardened. Then we need to get ahead of them. If you come forward first. You're cooperating, not covering up. That could save everything. Eliana's chest rose and fell. Do you think they'll believe me? I've lived off Gabriel's money for decades. Carol shook her head. You've been kept in the dark. The FBI understands manipulation. What matters is that you act before Isabella and Adrian twist the story. Eliana stared at her hands. Hands that had once scrubbed kitchen tiles and stitched school costumes, now trembling on the edge of a federal scandal. Then I'll tell them myself, she said. I'd rather face the truth than be blackmailed by my own child. Harrison arranged the meeting. The following afternoon, Eliana sat in a sterile conference room across from Agent Sarah Martinez of the FBI. The woman's presence was no nonsense, her dark eyes sharp as glass. Mrs. Carter, do you understand that by speaking with us, you may implicate yourself in benefiting from criminal proceeds? The agent asked. Eliana nodded. Yes. But I would rather be honest than let my daughter and her husband weaponize secrets I didn't even know existed. She laid everything out. Gabriel's double life, Isabella's fraud, Adrian's forged documents, Eleanor's veiled threats. Agent Martinez listened without interruption, taking notes in neat, mechanical handwriting. When Eliana finally stopped, the agent folded her hands. Mrs. Carter, you are braver than most people who sit in this chair. Would you be willing to assist us further? Eliana frowned. What do you mean? The agent leaned forward. Would you be willing to wear a wire? 3 hours later, Eliana sat stiffly in her own living room, a tiny recording device taped beneath her blouse. Her heart pounded with every tick of the clock. At exactly 8 o'clock, Isabella and Adrian arrived. They looked polished, confident, as though walking into a board meeting. Adrian carried a sleek briefcase. Mom, Isabella began, her tone sweet. We can fix this. If we all agree, we walk away with peace. Eliana forced a polite smile. Show me. Adrian opened the briefcase, sliding papers across the coffee table. Here's the deal. You keep Rosewood, $5 million in clean assets and immunity. In return, you confirm to the FBI that you knew nothing of Gabriel's laundering. The rest goes to the government. Everyone wins. Eliana tilted her head. And you too. Adrian's voice was smooth. We keep our reputations, our freedom, and our future. Eliana studied their confident faces. Tell me, she said slowly, when did you first discover Gabriel's laundering? Before or after you decided to forge his will? Isabella's eyes flickered, but Adrian answered quickly. That's irrelevant. Eliana pressed. No, it's very relevant. If you knew before, you were complicit. If you found out while committing your fraud, You're unlucky fools. Adrian's jaw tightened. Mom, you're overcomplicating this. Eliana leaned back, her voice calm but sharp. Actually, the FBI agent I spoke to thinks it's very relevant. The color drained from Isabella's cheeks. Adrian's hands froze on the papers. The FBI, he echoed. At that moment, Agent Martinez and two other agents stepped from the hallway, their badges flashing in the lamplight. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, she said firmly, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted extortion of a federal witness. The room erupted in chaos. Isabella's eyes widened, her voice trembling. Mom, how could you do this? We're family. Eliana's voice was steady, steel behind every syllable. Family doesn't forge documents and throw their mother into a motel. Family doesn't blackmail. Adrian's face twisted with fury. Margaret, Eliana, you don't understand the people Gabriel worked with. They won't like this attention. You're putting yourself in danger. Agent Martinez stopped writing Miranda rights mid-sentence. Mr. Hayes, are you threatening a federal witness? Adrian stammered. No, I'm warning her. Martinez's eyes narrowed. Then consider this an additional charge. Witness intimidation. Eliana sat silently, watching the people who had tried to destroy her life being handcuffed in her living room. For the first time she felt no fear, only power. After the agents left with Isabella and Adrian in custody, Agent Martinez returned to the living room. Mrs. Carter, you should know. Adrian wasn't entirely wrong. Your husband was indeed connected to dangerous people. Eliana's stomach dropped. How dangerous? Martinez opened a thick file. The Torino crime family. They've been laundering money through legitimate businesses for decades. Gabriel's consulting firm was one of their channels. Eliana felt her blood run cold. Then I'm in danger, she whispered. Martinez shook her head. Not exactly. There's something else you need to hear. She slid the file across the table. Your husband wasn't just laundering. He was cooperating with us. He was an informant. Eliana blinked, unable to process the words. An informant? Agent Martinez nodded. For 12 years, Gabriel was deep cover. He pretended to facilitate the Torino family's laundering while feeding us intelligence. His work led to dozens of arrests and over 200 million in criminal assets seized. Eliana's throat tightened. But the money, the fortune he left me. Martinez leaned forward. It's legitimate. The FBI allowed Gabriel to keep a percentage to maintain his cover. Everything you inherited is legal, Mrs. Carter. It was payment for his cooperation. Tears welled in Eliana's eyes. Gabriel, flawed but loyal in his own way, had protected her even after death. The man she thought was a stranger had been playing a longer game than she imagined. As the weight of revelation sank in, Eliana pressed her hand against her chest. So all along, Isabella and Adrian thought they were holding a weapon over me. In reality, they were pointing an empty gun. Agent Martinez's lips curved faintly. Exactly. Their ignorance will cost them everything. Eliana sat back stunned. She thought of Isabella's smug face, Adrian's threats, Eleanor's arrogance. None of them had known Gabriel's truth. The irony was almost poetic. She closed her eyes, whispering into the quiet room. Gabriel, you really did play the longest game. When she opened them again, she felt different. No longer discarded, no longer grieving. She was the woman holding all the cards now. The morning after Isabella and Adrian's arrest, Rosewood felt strangely quiet. Eliana walked through the halls, touching the walls she had once polished for Gabriel's guests, the chandeliers she had dusted while Isabella criticized her methods. Now, the silence wasn't oppressive, it was liberating. Around noon, Harrison called with updates. Isabella's bail was denied until further hearings. Adrian's request for bail was set at $250,000. Neither can pay without the frozen accounts. Eliana allowed herself a small smile. So they'll sit in jail a while. Harrison chuckled. Yes. And Mrs. Carter, your story is spreading fast. Reporters are calling this a landmark elder fraud case. Just then, the doorbell rang. Eliana opened it to find Eleanor Hayes, regal in her pearls, stepping into the foyer as if she still owned the world. We need to talk, Eleanor said smoothly. Eliana raised a brow. We already did. You offered me hush money. I declined. Eleanor's lips curved. This time it's not about money. It's about survival. Eleanor sat in the drawing room, her posture perfect. Gabriel wasn't the man you thought he was, she began. Eliana folded her arms. I know. He was working undercover with the FBI. Eleanor blinked, clearly caught off guard. You know. Eliana's gaze didn't waver. Yes. And unlike your son, my husband was on the right side of the law. Eleanor's smile faltered. Mrs. Carter, don't be naive. The Torino family won't care about Gabriel's FBI connections. They'll see you as inheriting his fortune. Their fortune, they'll come after you. Eliana tilted her head. You seem very concerned for my safety, Eleanor. Why is that? Eleanor smoothed her skirt. Because Adrian could negotiate a deal if you cooperate. You still have time to prevent this from escalating. Eliana laughed softly, a sound Eleanor had never heard from her before. You think I'll save your son after he threw me out of my home and forged documents to steal my life? Well, let him face his consequences. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. You're making a mistake, Eliana. But as she rose to leave, it was clear the mistake no longer belonged to Eliana. That evening, Eliana sat with Agent Martinez and Carol Chen, reviewing new developments. The Torinos are aware Gabriel was cooperating, Martinez explained. They won't target you directly. They're too busy cleaning up their own mess. Carol added. But you need protection for now. We'll arrange federal security detail. Eliana nodded, grateful yet oddly calm. I'm not afraid anymore, she said quietly. Carol leaned forward. You should be careful though. Isabella and Adrian may still try to manipulate the narrative. They could claim Gabriel was corrupt rather than cooperative. Eliana gave a bitter smile. That sounds exactly like Isabella, always twisting truth into something she can live with. Martinez placed a hand on the folder. Mrs. Carter, the truth is on your side. And we'll make sure it stays that way. Eliana looked at the two women, realizing for the first time in years she wasn't alone in this battle. She had allies now. Days later, Isabella called from jail. Mom, please, you have to help me, she begged, her voice raw. I made mistakes, I know, but I'm still your daughter. Eliana held the phone tightly, her heart twisting but her voice steady. You told me to find somewhere else to die, Isabella. Do you remember? Silence. Then a small sob. I didn't mean it. Eliana's tone sharpened. You meant every word. You lied about Dad's will. You forged documents. You threw me into a motel with 2 suitcases. Don't pretend it was an accident. Isabella's voice cracked. Mom, I was scared. Adrian said it was the only way to secure our future. I didn't know how far it would go. Eliana sighed. You always had a choice. And you chose greed. Before Isabella could reply, Eliana hung up. For the first time, she realized she no longer needed her daughter's approval. Meanwhile, Adrian tried his own angle. Through his lawyer he sent Eliana a message. Mrs. Carter, let's settle. You keep the estate, a portion of the money. And we agree not to expose Gabriel's records further. Eliana read the letter slowly, then laughed bitterly. They still think I'm weak. She passed it to Harrison, who shook his head. They don't realize the FBI already cleared Gabriel's cooperation. Their leverage is gone. Eliana nodded. Then let them stew. They thought they were predators, but they were playing a game they couldn't win. Harrison's eyes twinkled. And you, Mrs. Carter, you're proving to be a much stronger player than they ever imagined. The news began reporting daily updates on the case. Rosewood widow exposes inheritance fraud, flashed across TV screens. Neighbors whispered when Eliana went to the market, some with pity, others with admiration. One morning, a woman in her 70s stopped her at the bakery. "You've given us courage," she said softly. "My son's been draining my accounts for years. Thought I was powerless. But if you can fight back, maybe I can too." Eliana's eyes misted. For the first time, her story wasn't just about survival, it was about giving others strength. That night, she sat in Gabriel's study, now her study, and whispered to his photograph. "You wanted to protect me. Maybe in the end you gave me more than money. You gave me a reason to fight." 1 week later, Eleanor returned, her mask of elegance cracking. "Eliana, please," she said, voice strained. "Adrian's case looks worse every day. The prosecutors have more than we imagined. If he goes down, our entire family's reputation collapses." Eliana folded her arms. "That's not my problem." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "You could show mercy. Reduce the charges. Think of the children." Eliana's voice was icy. "Mercy? Did Isabella show me mercy when she tossed me into a motel like trash? Did Adrian show mercy when he waved forged papers in my face? Well, they will face justice." Eleanor's shoulders slumped. For the first time she looked small. "You've changed," she whispered. Eliana's gaze hardened. "No. I've finally remembered who I am." At Rosewood, renovations began. Eliana hired new contractors, ripping out the wine cellar plans Isabella had insisted upon. Instead, she built a library filled with light. Robert's old study became her art studio, canvases blooming with colors she hadn't touched since her 20s. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she had long buried. One afternoon, Harrison visited and smiled at the transformation. "It suits you," he said warmly. "For the first time, this house reflects you, not just Gabriel's vision." Eliana nodded, wiping paint from her fingers. "For years, I lived in other people's designs. Now it's mine." Case moved quickly. Prosecutors announced charges: conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion. Adrian faced additional counts tied to financial crimes uncovered by investigators. Isabella's trial was set for 6 months later. When reporters asked Eliana for a statement, she chose her words carefully. "This is not just my story. It's the story of every parent who raised children only to be betrayed by greed. It's about justice, not revenge." Her words went viral, shared by advocacy groups nationwide. Suddenly, Eliana became a symbol of resilience, her name tied to movements demanding stronger elder protection laws. That night, Eliana sat by the window at Rosewood, watching the moonlight spill across the lawn she had once tended with Gabriel. Her phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "Mom, please forgive me. For the children's sake." Eliana stared at the screen, her chest heavy. She typed slowly. "I will think of them when they grow up. But forgiveness is not a shield from consequences." She set the phone aside and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she slept deeply. Not as a victim, not as a discarded mother, but as a woman who had survived betrayal and stepped into her own power. Months passed, and Rosewood thrived under Eliana's care. The garden she once maintained for Gabriel now bloomed with wildflowers she planted herself. The air smelled of lavender and jasmine, not expensive perfumes or Adrian cigars. One morning, Harrison arrived with news. "The district attorney's office wants you to testify," he said gently. "Your voice will be powerful for the jury." Eliana took a deep breath. "I'll do it. Not just for myself, but for every mother treated like a burden instead of a blessing." Harrison nodded, his eyes warm. "Gabriel would be proud of you." Eliana gave a small smile. "For the first time, I think I'm proud of me too." When the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches, scribbling notes as though every word might light up tomorrow's headlines. Isabella sat at the defense table, pale and tense, while Adrian kept his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the judge. Eliana stepped onto the witness stand with her head high. The prosecutor asked, "Mrs. Carter, can you tell us what your daughter said to you the day she forced you out of Rosewood?" Eliana's voice was steady. She told me to find somewhere else to die. She called me useless. Gasps rippled through the room. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. But Eliana didn't flinch. She continued, describing the forged documents, the motel, the $200 given like a tip. Every word was a nail sealing the coffin of their defense. The defense attorney tried to twist her words. Mrs. Carter, isn't it true you were confused after your husband's death? Eliana met his gaze calmly. Grief didn't confuse me. Lies did. And I know the difference. Laughter broke out softly from the gallery. Even the judge allowed a brief smile before silencing the room. Isabella buried her face in her hands while Adrian clenched his fists. Eliana looked at them, not with hatred, but with clarity. For years she had begged for respect. Now she commanded it. After 3 days of testimony and evidence, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty on all counts. Isabella sobbed loudly as the judge announced her sentence. 18 months in federal prison with probation to follow. Adrian received 3 years for his role in the forgeries and financial crimes. Eleanor gasped from the gallery, clutching her pearls as though reputation were more valuable than justice. Eliana sat silently, her face calm. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood. This case was never about money. It was about dignity. I may be older, but I will not be discarded. Applause broke out before the judge could bang his gavel. Life after the trial was both quieter and louder. Quieter because Isabella and Adrian were no longer storming through Rosewood. Louder because the media couldn't get enough of Eliana's story. Invitations poured in. Interviews, advocacy panels, even offers for a book deal. Eliana accepted one carefully chosen opportunity. Channel 7's feature on elder justice. Sitting under the bright studio lights, she looked directly at the camera. If you're watching this and feel powerless, remember, you are not invisible. Stand up. Fight. Her voice carried across television screens, touching lives she would never meet. Letters from strangers began arriving at Rosewood. One from Atlanta read, Mrs. Carter, you saved my mother. After seeing your story, we moved her back home and apologized for how we treated her. Another came from Nairobi. Your courage gave me strength to confront my greedy brothers. Eliana sat in her new library one evening, reading the letters with tears rolling down her cheeks. She realized her battle had become more than personal. It had sparked a movement. Gabriel had left her money, yes, but she had turned it into something far greater, hope. Yet, even amid her victories, ghosts lingered. One night, Eliana dreamed of Gabriel. He stood in the study, papers in hand, smiling the smile that had both comforted and frustrated her through decades of marriage. You found the truth, Dream Gabriel whispered. And you found yourself. She woke with tears drying on her face. For years, she had lived in his shadow, bending her life to fit his vision. Now she realized she didn't need to carry regret. Gabriel had played his part. She was finally playing hers. 6 months later, Eliana founded the Carter Foundation for Elder Protection, dedicating $15 million to help seniors facing financial abuse. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from advocates, lawyers, and grateful families. At the foundation's launch event, she stood at the podium in a tailored navy suit. Once I was told I was useless, she said, voice ringing through the hall. Today I tell you, no one is useless. Every life, every voice, every mother and father deserves respect. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Eliana felt taller than she ever had. Isabella wrote letters from prison. The first few were full of excuses, blaming Adrian, blaming grief. Then came apologies, long and teary, begging forgiveness. Eliana read them, then set them aside. One afternoon Harrison asked, "Will you respond?" Eliana shook her head. Forgiveness is not a letter. It's a life lived differently. She hasn't proven that yet. Harrison nodded. You're wise. Eliana sighed. I'm just tired of being manipulated. I won't step back into that role again. Adrian, too, tried reaching out through his lawyers, offering settlement money in exchange for leniency. Eliana refused each attempt. He chose greed, she told Harrison. Now he can live with the consequences. For once, the law had done its job, and Eliana felt no guilt in letting it run its course. She poured her energy into painting in her art studio, splashing colors across canvases like chapters of her new life. Each brushstroke was a declaration. I am not invisible. One sunny afternoon, Eliana walked through Rosewood's gardens with Carol Chen, who had become both investigator and friend. You know, Carol said, you're different from the woman I met months ago. Stronger. Braver. Eliana smiled softly. I had no choice. My daughter thought she could strip me of everything. Instead, she gave me the chance to find myself. Carol laughed lightly. And you found more than yourself. You found a legacy. Eliana looked up at the roses blooming against the stone walls. Yes, she said, a legacy no one can steal. The Netflix documentary premiered the following spring. Titled The Widow's Gambit, it told Eliana's story with cinematic flair. Dramatic reenactments of Isabella's betrayal, interviews with Harrison and Detective Delgado, and Eliana herself speaking candidly about betrayal, survival, and triumph. Viewers across the world watched, gasping, crying, and cheering. Social media exploded with hashtags like #ElianaStrong and #ElderJustice. Eliana sat in her living room as the credits rolled, sipping tea, her phone buzzing with messages of support. She whispered into the quiet, Gabriel, you'd never believe this. But maybe, just maybe, you would be proud. Years later, Rosewood remained Eliana's sanctuary. The house had changed. Rooms redesigned, colors softened, the atmosphere finally her own. Children from the foundation came often, thanking her for scholarships. Neighbors stopped by with flowers, calling her a hero. Yet Eliana never forgot the night she packed her life into 2 suitcases. She kept the old battered luggage in the attic as a reminder of where she had begun. Whenever doubt crept in, she would touch those suitcases and whisper, never again. On Isabella's release day, Eliana received another letter. This one was simple. Mom, I know I don't deserve it, but I hope one day you'll let me show you I've changed. Love, Isabella. Eliana read it twice, then placed it in her desk. She didn't know what the future held between them, but she knew one truth. Forgiveness could not erase consequences. If Isabella truly changed, time would tell. For now, Eliana had no need to rush. She had her peace. One evening, Eliana stood on Rosewood's balcony, the sunset painting the sky in gold and crimson. She thought of Gabriel, of Isabella, of the journey from motel rooms to federal trials. She had been discarded, underestimated, betrayed. But she had risen, not with revenge alone but with purpose. She had built a life where her voice mattered, where her choices defined her. The woman who had once been told she was useless now looked out at the estate she owned, the foundation she built, the future she chose. Checkmate, she whispered to the wind. For the pawn had indeed become the queen.